It's a new year and time for a new state of play. Here with us this week, former Newcastle County Council President Stephanie Hansen. She's with the law firm of Young, Conaway, Stargett, and Taylor. And Michael Stafford, an attorney, writer, and contributor to MSNBC, is also here with us. Welcome. Happy New Year. And I think that's where we'll start with maybe Delaware's resolutions for the new year, for 2014. What should the state's priorities be heading into this year?
Well, I think one that we could probably start with, since it's topical and I think it will get addressed, is campaign finance reform. We have now the new Veazey report that's just recently come out from the former Chief Justice Veazey with some suggestions, and it's coming at a time when the General Assembly has just put into place the election reform task force. So I think those two things together, the recommendations from the Veazey report and the election task force, are going to bring some of his recommendations, Veazey's recommendations, up to light in the General Assembly. And some of them, a couple of them in particular, are going to be, I think, controversial, and that they would have a big impact on Delaware election law. One is simply the disclosure of the occupation and employer of all political contribution makers. For instance, if I give $100 to Bethany Hall Long's campaign, it's coming from not just Stephanie Hansen, $100, Bethany Hall Long. It's Stephanie Hansen, lawyer, Young, Conaway, Stargett, and Taylor to Bethany Hall Long. That's going to open up a lot more information as to who's contributing to political campaigns. And then another recommendation of the report is the ban on corporate contributions, which I think it would be a huge issue in Delaware election campaign.
Do you think that's something that the Republicans really jump on this year? I know they've already put out some announcements this week about getting some of those recommendations looked at and maybe implemented. Is that a big, in an election year, is that a big point for them this year?
I think from a political side, I'm not sure how much that's going to be an issue with the voters. I think it's more of a sort of an insider baseball. It's obviously very important. The reforms that are being proposed are probably needed and necessary. But when you think about your average Delaware voter going to the polls, is that the issue that's going to drive them there, or that's going to be at the top of their list in terms of who they're going to be pulling the lever for? I don't think so.
So what resolutions this year for Delaware? What do you think?
Well, for me, you know, I think the storyline in 2014 nationally is going to be a public policy response to sort of the three big shadows that are out there kind of over our economy right now: rising inequality, constricting opportunity, declining social mobility. And I think the local Delaware piece to that this year is going to be the effort to raise the minimum wage from $7.25 to $8.25. Delaware historically, I mean, we raised the minimum wage back in 2006, a couple of years before the federal government did. There's been a lot of discussion at the national level about raising the federal minimum wage maybe all the way up to $10 an hour, which is frankly where it would have been had the federal minimum wage kept pace with inflation. It doesn't look like that's going to happen down in D.C., certainly particularly in the House of Representatives. But I think locally it would be a good thing to do. It would certainly provide some support to needy Delawareans and to working families. Our neighbor to the north, New Jersey, is one of the other states that's taken action on this issue. And so I think this year Delaware is going to be part of a trend, both at the state, the local, and even the municipal level, of local governments taking action to address a priority that's not being addressed down in Washington, D.C.
And is that going to make a huge difference in the kind of inequality, the disparity between sort of the haves and the have-nots? It's a dollar or more an hour for somebody, you know, flipping burgers at McDonald's. Does it make that big of a difference?
No, but it's a first blow. I think any step is a step in the right direction. And for a person who's trying to survive, maybe even feed kids or care for elderly or unemployed family members, spouses, whatever the case may be, an extra dollar an hour when you're working 30 or 40 hours a week at a minimum wage job, or maybe even two, it makes a heck of a difference on their own bottom line.
And we did see some improvement coming into the end of 2013 in unemployment rate. Obviously, the governor and we all hope that continues to improve. Does that play any role in the minimum wage raising? I know it seems like opponents of raising the minimum wage always say, well, it will cost jobs because I won't be able to afford to hire these people because of having to pay them more. Does that play a role in the job picture?
Some, but I'm not sure about a whole lot, because what we've seen is that there's been a growth in the industries that actually, the hospitality industries and whatnot, that are paying the minimum wage. So we're not seeing the big high dollar jobs necessarily that are going to come in and kind of remove that minimum wage issue from the table. And I think with the issue of raising the minimum wage to become a living wage, the question is really, the issue that's on people's minds is, how is this going to affect the price of a Happy Meal? You know, if the effect of a Happy Meal is a quarter, you know, that's one thing. If it's going to cost me, you know, double the cost of a Happy Meal, then we're not even going to get to the sociological issue of whether or not we should, because it's going to stop at the gate.
Other issues up for debate, kind of a throwback to last year. Governor Markell, in the beginning of last year, laid out a number of gun initiatives. A lot of those got done. One of the things that didn't get done was a gun bill with a mental health restriction aspect to it. Kind of one of the things left on the table. Is that something that gets done quickly in the new year? Does it get done in this year?
Well, one would think so. I mean, the bill that was proposed last year passed almost unanimously from the House and obviously ran into difficulty in the Senate. The NRA was taking a position of no opposition at that point. It wasn't a major priority for them. There were a number of questions about that bill, particularly with respect to how it was going to apply to veterans. I think it should be a public policy priority. When we think of the issue of mentally ill people with access to weapons, we obviously think back to Sandy Hook, but it's bigger than that. I mean, when you look at gun violence nationally, gun violence in America, the typical gun death, it's not a good guy with a gun, it's not a bad guy with a gun, it's a sad guy using his gun on himself. The vast majority of gun deaths in the United States every single year are suicides. And so I think this bill, not only does it try to protect us from the Adam Lanzas of society, but it also could be a mechanism for reducing suicide rates.
Protect people from themselves.
Correct.
And then finally, another thing that got a lot of debate in 2013, and I'm sure we'll come back, it really got close, rescinding the death penalty, repealing the death penalty in Delaware. Does that get done this year? Was there enough push last year that it just needs a little bit to get over the edge this year, or still going to be a fight?
I think it's still going to be a fight. I mean, it's a fight by people that are effective in the General Assembly, who have been effective at getting a number of other, you know, the disclosure law for the pre-sexual abuse cases. This is with Karen Peterson, and also with the gay marriage bill. So the right people are in the General Assembly to get it done. They've got the political will behind them. I think it's still going to be a hard-fought battle, though.
There's not necessarily a natural political constituency. There are very few people. In general, if you ask the person on the street, a lot of people are going to be opposed to the death penalty, but it's not a priority issue for them, unlike some of the other social issues that have been addressed over the past several years in Delaware, where it's a top priority issue for a significant number of people. This just doesn't have that natural constituency. That said, you know, there are certainly good moral arguments in favor of doing away with the death penalty. There are also good economic arguments. Death penalty is very expensive to the state. So maybe there's a convergence there and enough people get behind it, but I agree with Stephanie, it's going to be a tough fight.
All right, we'll wait to see. We'll keep the tapes of this show to see exactly how good your predictions were at the end of this year, and we'll call you on it. Thank you to Stephanie and Michael Stafford for being part of State of Play.